Namaste. Trying to do 3 videos today. I've been away for a while, visiting Newfoundland, and I have been away from my practice for health reasons, so I am back now trying to regain myself in this video commitment that I made. So I'm going to reach in and pull a question from the jar. Oh, it's a big one. Whoa. Whoa. Let's see if I can make this out. What is meant by I would rather put myself in the oxytocin state of love and trust than the cortisol state of stress and fear? What is meant by I would rather put myself in the oxytocin state of love and trust than the cortisol state of stress and fear? I'm going to take a deep breath. Now, I am trying to think of the name of where I've heard that. That's a neuroscientist that said those words, and I was listening to her on a podcast once, I think, too, and I had heard those exact words, but I cannot think of her name right off. But I think what's being said here is basically a little to do with neuroscience as well as spirituality. I'd rather put myself in a state of an oxytocin state of love and trust rather than a cortisol state of fear and stress. Of course, oxytocin is one of the many neurotransmitters that are released when we are in a state of love, especially. It's the thing that's released by nursing mothers when they hold the babies to their breast, and it's often associated with maternal love, but it's also love in general. And it is a feel-good hormone like the dopamine that also comes during those times, and the serotonin. And then we have cortisol, which we know is the neurotransmitter released when we are under the sympathetic mode of the autonomic nervous system, the fight and flight reaction that we fight, flight, or freeze reaction that we can sometimes have under great stress and fear. So obviously cortisol can wear the body down after a period of time, and it can be very degenerative in its nature, while oxytocin is very generative in its nature. So we'd much rather have the oxytocin flowing through our bloodstreams than we would the cortisol. And the bodies would, of course, rather that to be so too. We feel better with oxytocin emotionally and psychologically, and we feel worse with cortisol, high levels of cortisol, psychologically and emotionally. But also the body feels better with oxytocin. We are healthier and more vibrant. Have you ever looked at a mother who is nursing? Her face is nice. It's almost like it's glowing, and her hair is beautiful, and they feel good. And then someone who's extremely stressed with high levels of cortisol are all clenched up and tensed up, and they're maybe gray in the face because of cardiac output and all that. So we know that it's much healthier to have the oxytocin flowing through our systems than the cortisol. But many of us live in a chronic low-grade stress response, so we're constantly having these low-grade cortisol levels. Many of us are closed up to love and trust in life because of fear reactions, and therefore don't have a lot of oxytocin flowing through our systems, and we do not love and trust life the way we are intended to, right? When we have oxytocin flowing, we are open. When we have cortisol flowing, we are closed to life, resistant to life. And when we call it a state of being, we'd rather have a state of love and trust in life. We'd be much happier, much lighter, much freer if we could just say, oh, life, do what you want with me, rather than thinking that we have to curl up in a little ball and plan life and create these external circumstances that reduce our stress or keep us safe or protective. Biologically, we are fear animals. We have an amygdala and hippocampus that are meant to protect us from stressors and from threats out there in the physical environment. But we're also biologically programmed for this oxytocin release. But it has nothing to do with what's externally happening around us. We can still release that oxytocin without having a baby at our breast. We can still release that cortisol without having a mother lying staring us down, because the mind perceives these things as being threats or being joyous occasions for generation and giving. It is the mind that determines that. It is the mind that judges. So that state of being is something we can actually control with practice. We can release oxytocin rather than cortisol. We can relax into life through practice. We can, calm our nervous systems. Bring the sympathetic system, which is responsible for that fight and flight response, down, so the parasympathetic, which is the homeostatic version of humanity. We're supposed to be parasympathetic. We're supposed to be in this chronic state of rest and digest with the odd, offshoot into stress and the stress response when it is called for. But we seem to be chronically activated into the stress response and very few, not have the limited experience of the parasympathetic mode where we're resting and truly relaxed. And in that mode, that's when we experience that oxytocin release. It is in that mode where we feel that love and faith and trust in life. Fear stops us from loving. And fear and love are the two emotions that I often speak about on this emotional ladder. They're the only two emotions according to A Course in Miracles. Fear is the lower spectrum of emotional energy. Love is the higher spectrum of emotional energy, and in the middle there is acceptance. If we can accept life for what it is, we can move up to the love emotions, from acceptance to peace, to joy, to enthusiasm and excitement, to bliss and ecstasy, which are all encompassed under love emotions. Just like that mother experiences to some degree when she's holding her child to her. The fear emotions are under acceptance. When we start resisting life, start saying no to life, I don't like it this way, it should be different, then we begin to experience all those fear emotions, from frustration to anger to blame to, hatred, all the way down to complete apathy and despair. In below acceptance is resistance to life, is fear, is struggle and suffering. Above acceptance is an allowance of life to be what it is. It's an embracing life. It's a trust. It's a love of life. Too many of us are spending most of our time in the fear emotions. We're spending our time in cortisol response, rather than physiologically, which equates to that low energy, that those emotional experiences that are less than life fulfilling, rather than in an oxytocin response of love, physiologically, which equates to a fulfilling and happy and joyous life experience. So when this author or question asker says, I'd rather be in a state of oxytocin, love and oh goodness, my word, joy, or love and trust for life, than a cortisol state of fear and stress. Well, we can do that. We can begin with the practice of learning to recognize what we're feeling, first of all, what we're experiencing, what we're thinking. How much time are we spending in thinking? Are we following our thoughts? Are we attached to our thoughts? Are we attached to this idea of me as a little personality? Those are things that keep us in the fear mode, in the fear emotions, in that cortisol state of being. Once we recognize where we are, we can begin changing by moving up the ladder one rung at a time, reaching for that acceptance of what starting to see life not as something here to serve this little me, but life as this amazing dance we get to participate in. And we begin to detach from our egoic need for life to be a certain way and start allowing life to be the way it is. And we start going with the flow of it rather than against it. We'll find ourselves moving up those ladder rungs to experience love. We'll be opening up to that oxytocin, which is supposed to be flowing through our blood vessels, just as Shakti, the energy of life itself, is supposed to be flowing through our Shushumnam and through our nadis, so that we experience joy of being alive. And that's the way it's meant to be. We're not meant to be closed up in fear. We're meant to be open in love and trust of life. Well, my time is up. I hope that makes a bit of sense. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste.